I forgot I put 13 in it.
Hey guys, welcome back to Triple F Shooting. As you can see, we have a very special rifle here today, the 1860 Henry. This was used on both sides of the Civil War, but never fully adopted like the Spencer was. So what we would like to do today is go through like what makes this rifle special. It's obviously very well known. There are entire companies named after this, or I should say company, but let's get into where this thing comes from and what made it kind of revolutionary at the time. So the Henry rifle comes from Benjamin Tyler Henry. He initially came up with a repeating action. Originally I think it was the Voltaic, ended up being called the Volcanic. You can see the Volcanic kind of, it's fairly sparse in video games. I'm not sure of any movie where there's a Volcanic present because they are very rare. If there is, it is almost assuredly a dummy prop or something. Those guns go for insane money now. But the Volcanic used an elevator for its cartridge, and its cartridge was what made it so revolutionary and also terribly anemic. The Volcanic actually put an entire charge and primer into essentially something similar to a mini ball. I'm sure you can't see that from where you're at, so I'll throw a picture. But a cross section would basically show that powder is put inside the bullet, which limits you to a very small cavity, and then it was sealed up with a priming agent. So it was a self-contained cartridge in, I believe, the late 1840s or mid 1850s, somewhere in there. Very cool. But as you can guess, the bullet went at somewhere around like spitwad speeds with that kind of a charge. You never had anything to eject because the whole round went. That's the beauty of caseless ammunition, but not terribly useful. The cool thing is, even with that failure in the Volcanic, that action lives on and is passed into the Henry. So we're going to jump out to the range really quick to give you a better up-close look of how that action works, and I'll throw in a couple of pictures to give you some like cross sections and show like what the lever's actually doing, and some of the lock work. But very, very smooth and reliable design on this rifle. Alright, so one really cool thing about this design is you're working off a cartridge elevator. So if you look down in here, you can see my bolt. We're a little bit dirty from firing, so as I run the lever, I'm going to do this really slowly. My bolt is pulling to the rear, cocking the hammer, and then that elevator is going to come up and then align the next round so that I can go home. So then the bolt is going to push the round home, and then the elevator is going to drop off. So real quick, I will go ahead and run a live round, fire it, and then show you how the spent casing comes out and show you that you can run this lever as slowly as you want to and it will still eject and function. Alright guys, so now we have 2 rounds in my magazine tube. I'm going to go ahead and show you how this loads. So I'm going to run the lever again very slowly. You can hear the hammer cocking. You can see that round has been elevated, and then my bolt is going to press that home. Now I'm going to go ahead and fire this guy from the hip. So now we have fired. Hammer's back down. So now I'm going to run this stupid slow. See, I'm drawing my case. Elevator pushes it off. Next round's coming in. Ready to go. So just ran this thing really slowly. You can also run it very quickly. So I have my live round in the chamber. I'm going to go ahead and shoot that. Then I'm going to rack this thing out. And that thing flew right past my face and I'm ready to go again. So very, very smooth action, and I can run it kind of however I need to. Okay, now that you've seen how the rifle works, and you can see that it can work both extremely slowly and still function reliably, and how quickly it can function reliably, we're going to do just a quick demo of basically what you'd be facing, you know, in the mid-1860s in the Civil War when you ran into individual soldiers armed with this rifle. Alright guys, so one reason, I just flashed the crap out of you, this thing is so bright. One reason that this rifle was such a big step back in the 1860s is just the speed at which you can shoot it. So what I'm going to do really quick, So I've got 5 targets behind me. I've got 10 rounds in the gun, and I'm just going to run through all 5 targets with 2 rounds on each target, and we'll get a timer on it too, just so I can kind of compare it to other firearms of the time. Obviously this thing is going to beat the snot out of a muzzleloader, but this gets compared to a Spencer a lot, so this little kind of speed shoot should give you an idea of just how much faster this thing can go. Okay, so we got our timer, we got our 5 targets. I'm just going to work from left to right, 2 on each, and just see how fast this happens. You will notice I'm wearing a glove. This thing gets a little warm on the front end. As you can see, I have no forend, and one thing I'm going to have to do is hop over basically my follower as it comes down. So it's going to be moving toward my hand, and I'm going to have to get out of the way at some point during shooting. Alright, so as you can see, that would be devastating to run into if you are operating even a breech loader. At the time would have been fast, but nothing like what a Henry rifle could put out. Oddly enough, no full-scale adoption happened with the 1860 Henry. The military believed that the action was a little bit too fragile. We can get into that in just a minute, but individual soldiers did pick this thing up. Now, one comparison that is drawn for Civil War rifles anyway very commonly is this thing against a Spencer. Now, we do have a video on the Spencer. It is an absolutely beautiful gun. I would never sell this thing. Very interesting piece of history, and awesome that you can shoot the thing with modern .45 Colt, so I can actually use it instead of, just hoping to never touch it and have a collector's piece. But we've got, since we have that older video, try not to drop my, you know what, we're back. But we have that older video of the Spencer rifle, and since we have this thing, figured we'd do a side-by-side of just how much more firepower you can put down with this gun. Stuck case. So that was 35 seconds. Now, one caveat to the speed of this particular rifle is if we're looking at the historical cartridges, this was in .44 rimfire. Benjamin Tyler Henry designed this rifle and that round. The original rimfire action actually had 2 firing pins on the bolt to more reliably strike the rim, which was kind of a neat design back then. Not something we would think of today with modern .22s or anything like that, but that round was a little less potent than something coming out of your Spencer, that 5650 or 5656, depending upon what time period you had it. So is that trade-off in speed worth the loss of, impact power or stopping power, if you want to call it that? Judging by loadings from back then and black powder, this thing would have hit somewhere, and this is all just my own kind of comparisons being drawn, but it would hit something like a .45 auto would today in general foot-pounds of energy. That is not the closest thing, but that's probably the easiest thing people can equate to something that's a little more common. I would not want to be hit with a .45 auto. However, the Spencer could hit harder. So it just depends on how you're going to use it. Because this was never purchased and fully adopted by any given side, there weren't enormous numbers of it. Also, they couldn't make the thing fast enough. They were only, I think, at peak performance, making somewhere less than 300 of these rifles a month. So when you've got troops being armed to the thousands, these aren't rolling around like crazy out there. However, multiple different regiments would purchase these individually and have somewhere, anywhere between 10 to 50 of these things in their ranks. You can imagine what kind of damage a raiding party would do with just 10 of these compared to 50 men armed with muzzleloaders. So the way I think of this thing is not so much as an intermediate rifle, like if we're talking about today's standards, but more of a submachine gun of sorts, at least when thinking about the Civil War time period. You have your main battle rifle or your front stuffing muzzleloader. You have your intermediate rifles that you can get in your breech loaders, things like the Spencer carbine, and then you have your submachine gun where you're firing more of a pistol caliber excuse me, charge, but you can do so very quickly. Now, one thing about the very quickly that you couldn't do is a reload. So we're going to get into how this thing loads and what that would take on the battlefield. This whole loading out of a bag thing.
Are you filming now?
Yeah. Okay. No, you're good. That's going to be enough.
Alright guys, so the one thing that we're going to do to kind of compare to the Spencer or any other rifle at the time is a reload drill. So we've already been through how to reload it, where I have to draw this follower all the way to the nose of the gun, peel that barrel sleeve back, and then start feeding that tube. Not any speed loaders or anything existent for that. Another thing with the time period of this rifle, I don't have a cartridge belt per se. Like, I don't have loops to draw individual rounds from. I would have had like a cartridge box if it could be modified to run that way, but a lot of guys are just going to be running like a pouch or a bag or something. So I don't have a Civil War era outfit, but these things existed in the frontier for many years after the Civil War. So we're just going to, go with the average Joe. I got my wagon train and a bunch of crazies getting ready to attack me, and I'm going to try to reload this thing out of my pouch. So what I'm going to do is fire one round, do a complete reload. Probably only going to do like 10 rounds as far as that goes, but this thing in 45 Colt will hold 13. The originals would have held either 15 or 16, I think. So lots of ammo could be dumped in here, but I'm just going to try to count out 10 and fire another round and see what kind of time we get. All right, so single round, reload 10. You can see I'm kind of jumbling rounds up, trying to grab as many as I can reasonably grab. There's 5, 6, 7. Oh God, they're all the right way, but wrong. 8, 9, and 10. Ride that thing home. All right, so 34 seconds between getting a round off and 10 more rounds. If you compare that to the Spencer, which I can throw in a clip here or just talk about it, whichever, it took me almost 40 seconds, I believe, to get a round off, reload 7 rounds, and go again. So quite a bit of time there, and you can get more out of your capacity on this rifle a little bit faster. The only real difference, or major difference to speak of, the Spencer had a more potent round. This thing's a little bit softer shooting. You don't have quite the velocity and weight behind your round, but still very effective within 100 yards. So something to keep in mind. So one thing I should mention is that you can single load this rifle if you have to. Same with the Spencer and a lot of other repeaters. There's just a bit of a process to it. So what we're going to do, I do have a live round in here. I'm going to go ahead and cock the hammer and shoot. Okay, so I have to get this round out. So the first thing I'm going to do is lever it open and eject. Now I can't single load because I have that elevator in my way. So it's too big. That's kind of the whole point of the elevator, is to trap that round. So what I have to do now is bring my lever all the way forward, drop the elevator, and then I'm going to run the hammer or the lever back to where just my bolt opens, so it's about the halfway swing on that lever, and then I can individually thumb in that round, close my bolt, and shoot. So if you're in that much duress, you actually can individually load this thing, but it's going to take me to get the round out, come home, and then back halfway, and doing that under stress and pressure is probably going to be something you have to practice quite a bit.
Okay, so you can see the reload is a little bit tedious. If you have handled a modern day Henry rifle from the Henry Repeating Arms Company, it's not too different. Only recently did Henry, the new modern company, come up with side gate loaders, but you can still load from the front tube. That was one, not maybe the reload so much as just the way this tube was set up, was one major reason that the military or the Union Army never really picked this thing up. As you can see, get my standy uppy out of the way, that is all open on the bottom, as you probably saw in the video, and that spring runs through with the follower to depress it. Now, if mud and things were to get up into the round, you are eventually going to gum up this action to the point where it will not work. Another kind of caveat to think about is, even though this rifle looks crazy fast, with modern smokeless ammunition, I'm just shooting cowboy loads, so they're not, you know, recoiling like crazy or anything. You wouldn't really want to shoot anything heavy through here. Anyway, smokeless rounds with clean ammunition, everything's running very smoothly. If we're shooting black powder, you are going to gum this thing up a little more quickly and start to experience a little bit more friction in that action until eventually you gummed it shut. I have no idea how many rounds that would take. I do not reload black powder, and I probably won't ever put a ton of black powder through this just because I really, really like this gun. I totally intend on using it, as you can see from kind of the brass wear and some of the marks on the gun. However, I don't want to turn it into a rust bucket, so probably not going to do that test. But this thing is potentially easier to get garbage into the action. I have a very open top on the gun where things can go right in, and I have that big long spring on the bottom. The other issue comes from the manufacturing side. Like we said a little bit ago, peak manufacturing was under 300 rifles a month, and part of that is due to this barrel assembly being all one milled piece all the way around. That is probably very difficult to do, especially at the time, and it is very heavy, and it is probably time consuming. So those were more of the problems with this rifle than the rifle itself, is just its manufacturing time and then the design of that magazine tube and barrel. The action is terribly successful and will go on to make the 1866, the 1873, and essentially drive the name Winchester into what it is today. So I believe that most of that fame and well-made product comes out of this action. So very cool to be able to say that you've got a piece that went on to produce an enormous company that made, you know, tons of firearms. But getting back to the rifle itself, the other major disadvantage that you can see is I have no forearm, so I'm holding barrel. Now, with smokeless rounds, it doesn't get very hot very quickly. You could probably go through a stage of cowboy action where you have lulls in between shooting, you're only firing 10 rounds at a time, and never really heat the thing up. If you're shooting black powder, it's going to get a lot hotter, a lot faster. Back then, where you're shooting black powder in combat scenarios, I would imagine you'd need a glove to run this effectively. I wore the glove because this magazine tube can actually get a little bit sharpish in there. Getting over being sick. And because, you know, touching that blued barrel kind of grosses my feelings out a little bit. I got to wipe it down again. But Lacking a forearm is sort of a problem. The Spencer very readily had a forearm to hang on to, even though it was very small. Not really an issue there. The Spencer also does not let as much gunk into the action unless you are actively opening it. Everything's pretty well sealed up compared to this thing. So you can see where some of the advantages and disadvantages fall out. And essentially it's up to if you can keep the thing clean, and you need to be able to put down a lot of rounds. With that 44 Henry, this was a 15 round and one in the chamber gun, so 16 rounds compared to a guy that can put 3 rounds out a minute if he's good with a muzzle loader. Or we have a side-by-side of the speed to show just how much more quickly you can put rounds down with this compared to the Spencer. Given I did have a few hang-ups with the Spencer as far as the action, that could be due to the caliber and its modern duration. Still something to kind of be aware of. Okay, lastly, just a very quick muzzle to stock analysis of this gun. This is not an original. That would cost somewhere around $30,000 to $60,000, and you could never fire the thing, and I never would. So this is a Uberti made, imported by Taylor's and Company, who does a lot of other Western firearms similar to Cimarron. So very high quality. It is not as nice as what Henry produces with their kind of heirloom quality Henry originals, but again, I want to be able to shoot the thing. This is already fairly expensive. I don't know that I would buy one of those heirloom quality rifles and shoot it all the time. So all that being said, the fit and finish on the gun is very nice. Up front you have your barrel sleeve that allows you to open the magazine tube to drop rounds in. I have that big brass bead. We can talk about the sights in this chunk of video.
Alright guys, you can see that we have a brass front blade so that your eye will pick that up a little better. Out here with all the dead leaves and stuff, it might be a little bit difficult to see it, but we'll come around the side here for you. It's kind of like a great big chunky shark fin on the end. You can tell it's definitely not meant for precision shooting. It's pretty wide and thick. And then as you come back, we have a military style ladder sight. Most of these guns that you get in reproductions or that you see in old movies and stuff are going to have buckhorns. The 1860, since it was made around the Civil War and was used to a smaller number in the Civil War, actually has military style ladder sight. We're at a very optimistic 800 yards. Being that this is in 45 Colt, I really doubt that's ever going to be a thing, but you can see here I can slide up and down for different ranges or flip down for my just regular battle sight, so to speak. But that's the sight system you're dealing with. I have a fairly shallow V-notch on the rear and a real chunky brass bead up front. Now, for cowboy action shooting, that chunky brass blade up front is great because it's going to contrast on those targets. I can see it very quickly and effectively. Works out well there. Again, for precision shooting, probably not your best setup, but we are in 45 Colt, so nothing really to worry too much about there.
But moving on back, I do have a sling loop, which is literally just a little bitty half loop mounted in between the barrel and magazine. The sling that I have on here is a reproduction sling. I cannot off the top of my head remember where I got it, but it has a basically just a hook that you have to put through there and kind of clamp down yourself. I do not carry this around by that sling very often. I don't think that's maybe the best way to do it, but that's how they did it at the time. Markings on the gun, I'll get a couple pictures, but up at the top it says Henry's patent, which Uberti usually does a very good job of keeping realistic looking markings on the gun and not going over the top. I have my rear ladder sight that you just saw in the video. 45 Colt stamped on top to show my chambering. And then over here on the side of the gun I have my proof marks and Taylor's and Company Uberti Italy markings. On the brass receiver, I don't think it's actually really brass, it is an alloy, but it's very brass-like. So the fit and finish is absolutely wonderful. The side plates on this thing, I am not going to take the gun apart right now, but they are milled to basically perfection and they are razor sharp. They will absolutely cut you if you're not careful. So keep that in mind if you have one and you're taking the thing apart. All the case hardening on the lever and the action on the toggle links and everything inside looks very good. hammer knurling is excellent, and the case hardening looks good there. And then on the tang of the rifle, as you would have back then, it says model 1860 Henry. I'm not sure how perfectly accurate that marking is. I think it's fairly close. I don't know if the wording and everything's exactly the same. The only complaint I'm gonna have with this entire piece of historical reproduction is that they went red on the stock. That is pretty much any Uberti rifle that you see. It's any of I've ever seen. They have this very reddish colored wood instead of a darker walnut color. I would really prefer that to be a little bit darker, but it's very pretty. It's just kind of an odd popping red against all this other wood where, you know, that's not something you would normally see. But again, excellent fit and finish. There are no major standoff lines, anything like that. I do have a lever lock on the gun, so if I want to basically make this thing super safe, I twisted the wrong way, I can make it so I can't even open the lever. Not something I'm going to do very often. Serial number down on the bottom, and then I have my brass butt plate with that fairly severe crescent shape. Shooting back then was meant to be done kind of off the side of the arm with chicken wing in it, as we would think today. That has since evolved, but that cups very nicely. You can get it up in the shoulder pocket and have a little bit more modern shooting stance. Works very well. Again, the action, although that cartridge elevator is solid brass and a little bit heavy, this action is extremely smooth. You can see that the action is cocking my hammer for me at the same time, which is another huge speed boost over the Spencer. But all in all, I believe you can still get this rifle for around $1,500, maybe a little bit less. I'm not sure if they've gone up. For what you are paying, it is a beautiful rifle that is extremely fun to shoot. I think they only come in 45 Colt and 44-40. I don't believe you can get this thing in 38 like some of their other, you know, their 1866s and 1873s, 92s, things like that. So, all that being said, the Uberti 1860 Henry clone or copy is absolutely worth the purchase. It is a beautiful gun. It is awesome to be able to take something historical and run it and see what that may have been like in a combat scenario or just historical shooting. One thing to think about is this wasn't like only used in the Civil War. It was used in the frontier. It was found in the hands of native nations after battles. This thing really did have a huge impact on history, especially in the Winchester Arms Company. So very, very, I keep saying fun and cool, but it really is a very cool rifle to own. Interesting piece of history and just an absolute joy to shoot. So with all that being said, thanks for watching Triple F Shooting, and we will see you in the next video.